the first thing that we want to do to set up the context API is to create a context. But what is a context, you may ask? Well, a context is like a container that holds our global state data. Let me show you how it works. First of all, let's create a new folder in our project and I'll call it store. Now this store folder will contain all the code that we need for the state management. And just for demonstration, I'll create a new file here and I'll call it global store. And within this file, we need to create a context. To create a context, we need to call the create context function provided by the React library. As mentioned just now, this is the container that will hold all the data in our global store. Once we're done, let me show you how to load data into this global store now. First of all, let's quickly export the global context and we'll go to our main JSX file to register the global store. Let's import the context. Now the context object exposes a few properties that is needed for us to register the global store. And I'm talking about the provider property in particular. The provider property is actually a React component where we should wrap it around our app components in order for the context API to work. Now the provider component accepts a prop called value, and this is where we can pass in the initial value of our data in the store. Let's create a dummy object for now. And we'll pass this object to the value prop. We can read this state in any component that was wrapped underneath the provider component. Let's try it out. We'll go to our home page, and to read the data inside the global store, we will need to call another hook function called useContext. And the hook function will accept one argument, which is the context object instance. Let's console out the result of this function and we'll see what will show up in our browser console. Oh dear, we see an error. Seems like there's an import issue in our global store. Let's fix it by using ES6 imports rather than a require function from CommonJS. And now back to our browser, we can now see the global store object containing the data that we passed to the provider. Beautiful. Isn't that neat? We can now read the data in our global store by simply using the useContext hook function. However, I'm not too happy with the current API at the moment. To read the data from the global store, we currently need to import the hook function and also the context object. Let's make a small improvement on this procedure. Why don't we delegate this logic into our global store? We'll go back to our global store file and we'll create a helper function called useGlobalContext and we'll return the result of useContext right here. And that means back inside our home page, in order for us to get a global store, we can now replace the code here with just one function code. And that will make our life a lot easier. We'll go back to our browser and we can still see the global store printed out in the console as before. Great! But now if we look back at our main JSX file, as our app grows larger, the content inside our store will get larger as well. And the main JSX file will not be the best place for us to define the content of our store. And the code here looks a little bit messy as well. Let's migrate them to our global store file just like what we did before. We will create a React component, and this component will be a simple wrapper around the provider property from the global context. And then we'll relay all the props onto the underlying provider component. Once we're done, back inside the main JSX file, we can now simply load our global provider component to replace what we had before. Let's test our code. We'll go back to our browser. There wasn't any error, and we can still see the global store object in the console. And that is the basic on how we can set up state management using the context API and how to read the data from the store. We haven't learned about how to mutate or change the data in the store yet, and we'll talk more about it in the next lesson. I'll see you then. Key takeaways for this lesson. A context object is a container that holds data. The provider property in a context object is a React component that is required to wrap around our app components for the context API to work. If we do not use the provider property, then the context API will simply refuse to work. The useContext hook function allows us to read data from the store. That's it for now, and I'll see you again in the next video. If you would like to see more content, consider supporting us by becoming a member at my website, arcadia.io. It is similar to Patreon, but in return, you get a lot of premium tutorials and lessons. If you can't become a member, that's totally fine. We are just happy that you are here. We spend a lot of time and energy to produce high-quality videos for you. Feel free to check out our other videos on YouTube, and if you can leave a thumbs up, you will really make my day. If you subscribe, I would jump for joy, and I'll make more videos for you. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you next time.